They're actually listening to the Tories, aren't they?
Disappointing. Look, I'd say the three things, David. First of all, midterm governments tend not to do well at local elections.
Are you a midterm government? You've just had a new Prime Minister appointed.
Well, I know, but we're in the third term of a Labour government. Let me just explain my reasons,
right.
and then come back to me. First of all, I think that's always the case. I think we've polled under 30% at most local elections since 1997. Secondly, very difficult economic circumstances. I think John is right about that, particularly an issue in the south, but I think across the country, I got that in my constituency in Doncaster, a sense of difficult economic times. Thirdly, the government has had a difficult few months, and I think there's no getting away from that. A whole series of things have happened.
So you got no bounce from Brown's becoming Prime Minister?
Well, actually, we did get bounce, but we've had some difficult events in the last few months.
What would those be? Not having an election in November?
That was one of the things. Yeah.
Mistake?
I don't think it was a mistake. No, I think the speculation was allowed to go on too long, and I think we all accept our share of responsibility.
So that was a mistake.
For that. Yeah, well, letting the speculation go on was
the 10p confusion.
The 10p was difficult in the 10p was difficult in the campaign. Yeah, it was difficult. Let me just say one other thing though, which is, does this mean that somehow the Tories have it in the bag for the general election? Absolutely not, in my view. The task for us is to show, as John said, that we can respond to people's concerns. And let me make a sort of ideological point, if I may, unusual maybe, on these programmes, which is the mood of the times is not for what the Tory party stand for, which is government getting out of the way. Philosophically, that's really what William and his colleagues still believe in. And when you think about the issues people are facing in the global economy, in concerns around social care, big issue I find, in any case, on the doorstep, looking after elderly relatives, education, whole series of issues, I don't think the mood of the times is for what William stands for. Now, our task... Let me just...
Well, no, you can't say, let me go on any longer.
Well, the mood of these elections is for what the Conservatives stand for. It's quite hard to sit there and say, well, as the Conservatives gain seats all over the country, the mood isn't with the Conservative Party. It clearly, these are exceptional results. And if this projection, if the BBC projection is right, then I think I'm right in saying this would be the lowest Labour share of the vote in the modern history of local...
If it does go...
That is not just a mid-term thing. So these are, I think we've seen enough results now to say these are exceptionally good results for the Conservative Party. And across the country, when you see 6 Conservative gains in Sunderland, where we haven't seen all the Bury results yet, but an important ward in Bury changing, some big swings in some of the Bolton wards. I think the idea the Conservatives cannot win in the north will also be laid to rest tonight.
But you would accept what Ed Miliband said, that this doesn't mean you automatically win a general election next year or the year after?
Oh, we are not going to think the next election is in the bag until the votes at the next general election have been counted. And of course, we hope they come out in the same way. We will take nothing for granted. But we've taken steady steps. Since David Cameron became the leader in each set of elections, we have taken a step forward. And this looks like it's a big step forward.
I think the big significance of the results tonight is that they are worse for Labour than immediately after the Iraq War, when Tony Blair was severely unpopular, when it was evident by then that there were problems in Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction had not been found. That is bad, and it's significant because Gordon Brown's election as Labour leader was billed as a renewal for the party. Does it mean that renewal is not possible? Well, of course it doesn't, but it means the principal card that many people believed had to be played in the Labour Party, which is change the leader, hasn't done the trick. Now, their hope must be that this is because of the state of the economy, that it is a return, if you like, to politics as normal in the Tory years, where they had mid-term blues and then recovered and beat the Labour Party quite easily. But there will have to be long, hard thinking after tonight in the Labour Party about how on earth they now turn this round.
Because we're talking not 26%, but 24% of these figures go on as they are at the moment.
And it's not since Harold Wilson's day that we've been talking about that. This already, remember, at the beginning of the evening, this was the lowest number of Labour councillors in 35 years. And from what we can tell, that will be going backwards. They will be getting in a worse position at the end of the night.
It's before you were in long trousers, Ed Miliband, isn't it? Not been as bad.
I can't say I remember the Wilson days with sort of as much recollection as maybe.
Were you born in the Wilson?
I was. I remember him resigning. Actually, play school was cancelled that day. I remember.
Tony King.
Can I just make a point about the gap? I went back through the records to see what was the largest gap between the two major parties that nevertheless resulted in the party that had been behind actually winning the next election. And if you go back to 1985, you find that the Tories had a catastrophically bad time. In 1985, they went on to win in 1987. The gap then between the two major parties was 11 points. And in a few moments, presumably, we're actually going to see the projection and we'll see how large the gap is now between the two main parties, which is in
Let's
the end
just
what
have
matters.
the result from Maidstone. The Conservatives, well, Maidstone was run by the Liberal Democrats, the minority, I don't know what you call it, government cabinet running Maidstone. Conservatives have gained it up 2, Liberal Democrats down 1, and Labour down 2. And at this point, it's time to catch up with the results in more detail wherever you're watching in the country.
Oh, okay. We can talk about that. Hello, you join me now with 3 London politicians. David Lammy for Labour, Lynn Featherstone for the Lib Dems. And we're not quite sure, Sean Bailey, whether to call you a politician or not. A political face entering the fray for the Tories.
That's right.
And we'll come back to that point in a second. Lynn, let's start with the mayoral race. Start with Brian Paddock, who we haven't discussed much this evening yet. Matthew Dancona called him the amiable gooseberry in the mayoral contest.
That's so unkind. He's been a
That was quite nice.
he didn't actually look like that. But are you saying that Ken and Boris were having an affair?
I'll leave that one to you.
Brian Paddock's been a fantastic candidate, but I think it is tough being squeezed between two such eminent and long-serving, well-known politicians in an age of celebrity.
He could have decided this one though. If he had let us know his second preference, that could have had a big influence.
Well, I think, as he puts it, you shouldn't really have to tell a Liberal Democrat where to put their second vote, actually. He feels and he felt that it was really up to Londoners to decide, and obviously they'd be Lib Dem voters if it was a second preference to Brian. He felt it really depended on what their view was and what they thought, and he did not want to influence. And his view was a plague on both their houses. Neither of them were up to much, and he wouldn't take a job in their damned administration anyway.
Yeah, and he definitely got the sound bites going. He called your candidate tragedy, Sean's candidate comedy. Tell us about tragedy, David Lammy. Do you think Ken is looking like a tired man these days?
Look, I was with him today in Tottenham, in the heart of Tottenham, walking up the streets, and I have to say that the genuine love, I think, that people have for him in the inner city, in the heart of the inner city, tremendous warmth. A lot of people saying, you can do it, Ken, you're going to do it, and, we went out and voted for you. So, no, he looked very buoyant.
And yet it's hard to ignore this time round these allegations of sleaze. Now, I admit they're allegations, there is nothing concrete against him, but that stuff can stick. And he has tied himself very closely to one of his advisors who's now resigned.
Yes, and this has been a tough campaign. And one of London's leading newspapers has led that campaign to some extent, and I think it's right to say that there has been no sleaze proven. I'm convinced that Ken will come back into City Hall. He perhaps has to broaden his tent. He's already said that. He needs to bring in people who are not closely associated to him and come from different political hues. He's already said that. But the important thing is, I think that Londoners are turning out for him today.
Let's turn to the man that Brian Paddock called comedy. Sean, I've got to ask you, we look at the contrast between you want to be the next generation of young Tory politicians, you grew up on a council estate, you work with disadvantaged kids, and you're voting for Boris Johnson for mayor. I mean, there's a world between you.
Not at all, because conservatism is a way of life. It's a set of principles and ideals, and Boris is modern and embodies them right now. For me, the thing about Boris is the policies. Ken turned the fight into a personal fight because he knew he couldn't win on policy. One of the big things about having a Conservative mayor or any kind of Conservative, you get a team event. It's a team event for us. If you look at the depth and the quality of Boris's policies, it's because the whole party was involved. We all gave ideas. He was willing to listen. So that, for me, reduced the distance between the likes of me and Boris to minuscule. It's
But
this
when
whole
you
thing.
take Boris into an inner city single state, what kind of reaction? I mean, you can go into into those places and you make sense, right? You know the people, you know how they're living. What happens when Boris walks into one of those?
Do you know why Boris makes sense? Because he came to learn. He never pretended he knew. He said, what is it that you would like to tell me? I know this for a fact because I brought him to many. And he asked questions. And the way in which he asked the questions enabled him to understand, because there's one thing you cannot say, Boris is not silly. He is an absolutely super sharp tool, and he's learned a lot, and he's taken that forward.
Lynn, I'm going to look at the wider picture now. Your new leader, Nick Clegg, well, I know he quite likes the number 30, but that aside, what kind of percentage is he hoping for? Because he hasn't been aiming very high.
Well, as high as possible. I mean,
Well, he was talking about 20 on Newsnight last night.
well, I think, you know, the Lib Dems need to hold their own, really, against... You're talking about the London battle now?
Well, no,
Or
I'm
more
talking
generally,
about the
wider
projected
battle?
share for the Lib Dems. They want to come out of
think-
this in second place, presumably,
Well,
right?
and I think they will. I think tonight you will see the Lib Dems come out in second place, and I think you'll see Labour crash quite badly. So I think the Lib Dems will hold their own and maybe improve somewhat on what was a high benchmark last time in 2004, the height of the Iraq War. That was the last time we saw Labour go into third place nationally in the poll.
Yeah.
I think you'll see the same again tonight.
David Lammy, a quick word about the London Assembly. You were on the London Assembly, and I'm aware of the inevitability of asking a black man about the position of the BNP, but that is a genuine threat this time around.
That's a real threat. I am relieved today that it looks like the turnout in London has been high. It's been high in inner London and it's been high in outer London. That would suggest that we might keep the BNP off the Assembly, but of course they only need 5%. They got 4.6 last time.
It's a
going to be
close run,
close, but all of us pray that they won't be there.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to take you over now to Tony Travers, our election supremo, who can give us a little bit of a steer on, from what we've heard tonight, Tony, do you think we can do the read across, as the traders say? Can we project what will happen here?
I think it is possible to see from these figures that have come in from the rest of the country that there has been a significant shift to the Conservatives and a small one away from Labour, and that kind of swing, certainly for the London Assembly, I think would put potentially one of the constituency seats in London under threat, and probably one of Labour's seats overall. So that could be, as it were, that what's going on in the rest of the country will feed through into the London Assembly at least. It's not quite so clear what it tells us about the mayor.
Very different voting system, though, here to the rest of the country.
Absolutely. For the mayor, you have 2 votes, first and second preference.
How many people do you think really understood the second preference vote?
I'm not sure they fully did. Once they got into the polling booth, they were then faced with papers that made them think hard, and I think many of them will have got it right on the day. But for the Assembly, you can vote for a constituency member in London and then a party, and then they sort of come up with a proportional result reflecting all the party votes but taking into account the constituency winners. So it's a complicated mixture of the two.
A quick word before we go about the mayoral candidates themselves. Ken Livingstone, we already discussed earlier, looking very solid as an incumbent, which is slightly unsettling possibly for a Londoner. Michael Portillo was saying that Boris certainly wasn't first choice for the Tories. Is that going to be a problem if he does get in?
I think if he does get in, David Cameron and the Conservative Party machine will want to discipline the kind of people he appoints and to keep a beady eye on him, frankly, to ensure that nothing can happen in London in this very high profile, here we are in City Hall, big budget institution that would feed through to national politics.
Tony Travers, thanks very much, and thanks to all my guests a little earlier. We'll be back in the City Hall with you very shortly.
The Conservatives have taken control of Bury in Greater Manchester. Here's the result. 26 councillors, they're up 3. Labour are down a net of 4. The Liberal Democrats up 1. And Manchester as a whole has been held by Labour. 61-34 Liberal Democrats. Very small change there. Liberal Democrats up 1. The Greens lose their seat. And 1 Conservative, which was always there. And St Albans, a Liberal Democrat gain. Liberal Democrats are up 1, Conservatives up 3 on 22, Labour on 5, down 3. So let's now, at this stage of the night, and it's 1:40 in the morning, and we've had enough of these wards in to call this election in terms of the national share of the vote, the projected national share. Remember, well, Jeremy will explain all this, but we're only talking about the way people have voted in these council elections. Jeremy.
Thank you, David. Yes, this is the big moment now. We take those local votes in this local election across part of the country, and we give you percentages for parties as if people had voted across the whole country, and we call that projected national share. And we're now able to do that. Let me just show you how many of our key wards are in. We had between 900 and 1,000 key wards, nearly 70% of them in now. That means 1.5 or more million votes are behind this. And these are the percentages that will stack into our graphs in the years to come and that we'll look back on. So they're very, very significant. This is the moment. Here we go. We're going to see Labour first. How are they doing? Labour have 24%. Now, in 2004, they had their lowest ever figure, as we mentioned. It was 26, the absolute doldrums of Blair's performance in local elections. Mr Brown, far from renewing the party as was hoped, seems to have gone below that. So that will be a blow for Labour and a blow for Mr Brown. What about the Conservatives? They were on 40 last year. What now? Let's have a look. Well, the Conservatives have registered a really substantial rise on their performance last year, 44%, which is real and serious progress towards winning a general election, as they will see it. Next one, Lib Dems. Look at this. Now, 25%, 1% below their performance last year, which was 26%, which of course resulted in Ming Campbell being pitchforked out of his job. There is, though, a straw to clutch at here for the Lib Dems because they are in second place. They've actually beaten Labour with their 25%. And then the others here, 7%. So, David and your guests, there we are, the projected national share for these local elections. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. We'll talk about that with our guests, but also with Tony Lloyd MP, who's the chairman of the Parliamentary Labour Party, who joins us now from the Northwest. Tony Lloyd, these results that have come through and the projected national share that you've heard are a major disaster for Labour, aren't they?
It's not a good night. There's no words I can put on it that's different from that. The only thing I would say, though, is this, is that I think most Labour MPs, and in particular Labour activists in my own city, in my own constituency, knew that this was going to be a difficult election for us to fight today, a difficult time, given the amount of political noise that the government's come through in recent weeks. Now, within all that, what Labour has got to do is to recognise that the very clear signal we're getting from the public, the public wants a Labour government that's clearly listening to what the public are saying. We've got to do that.
What does it mean the Prime Minister's got to do then?
Well, it does mean exactly what I've just said. It means that we've got to be very conscious of the fact that this isn't a general election. What these local elections tend to be is obviously affected by local issues, as they are in my own city, where in fact Labour won seats as well as lost some. But overall, we know very well what this is. It's a referendum on where the government stands.
OK, well, let's cut to the chase. You have a new Prime Minister who's chosen by the Labour Party without an election, so they're all behind him. They make this new choice. He talks about change, and the first evidence we have of how he's doing is the lowest Labour falling behind the Liberal Democrats and to the lowest figure in the popular vote they've had in tens of years. 40 years.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I think we've already agreed that this has been a very difficult night for Labour.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what does it say about the Prime Minister?
What it says about the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, like the rest of the government and like the rest of the Labour Party, has got to listen to what the public are saying. They want a government that listens to their concerns.
So they haven't been listening, you're saying?
And gets back on track and addresses the issues.
What has it not been listening to?
Well, there's been issues that we know at the moment over the 10p tax, for example. It was quite obvious on the doorstep that this is something that's hurt Labour. What the government has done is begun now to put forward a package that will minimise the impact of that. But what we've got to do is make sure we're explaining why we're doing these things and how in the end, will get through this particular situation.
If it can be explained, because it was the Prime Minister as Chancellor who brought in the 10p rate that he now says is such a bad thing it's got to be
But it was also this Chancellor who has given us probably the strongest economic position that Britain has had in many years, given the international difficulties that the world economy faces. Now, in the end, what the public will expect of this Prime Minister and of this government is that we explain clearly what the government's there for, how it intends to address the issues like the world economy, how it intends to address the issues that concern the British public, which, frankly, in areas like mine, but up and down the country, are much more about things like housing, education, the health service, to demonstrate that Labour's fitness and competence for government is as good as it has been in the past. And yes, we've got a long way to go. In those
Tony Lloyd, just stay with us a moment. Caroline Spellman is here, the Conservative Party chairman. What do you make of what Mr Lloyd's saying?
Well, I think it's much worse than the country indicating that it thinks the government isn't listening. I think it's the fact that the country doesn't trust Gordon Brown and he doesn't trust Labour anymore to run the country. I could hear Vince Cable tutting under his breath at the description of the economy being in a strong place. I mean, what we now know is we have the largest budget deficit amongst Western European nations, that actually during Gordon Brown's chancellorship, though there was much positive spin, the reality was he was creating a great big black hole in our finances, and the chickens have come home to roost, and that is very evident at this set of elections. The country has decided to speak out about its lack of trust in Labour government.
Jeff Hoon, are you hearing this, the Chief Whip for Labour? You heard what Caroline Spellman said. What do you make of it?
Yes, I did hear what she said. I don't accept that for a moment. We have a very strong economic position. We have more people in work in this country than any time in history. Clearly, there are difficult international circumstances, but the key is ensuring that Britain weathers that storm. So far, we have done remarkably well compared to other countries.
Months back of Stalin to Mr Bean and see
night across the rest of the country. They've had a good night here. They picked up 4 seats. The Greens have picked up the seat. The Lib Dems have lost 5. That takes it to no overall control. But the Liberal Democrat council leader here, Warren Bradley, has signed up an independent, a former Labour councillor called Nadia Stewart. She's taken the Liberal Democrat whip just as the votes have been counted. So in effect, that gives the Lib Dems overall control again. So based on the vote, it's hung. But based on who people are signed up for, this is back with a majority Liberal Democrat control.
How do people explain this? I mean, you stand and actually at the count, you switch sides.
Well, this particular councillor wasn't actually standing, so of course it's up by thirds. So this was a councillor that wasn't up for election this time, but she'd already stepped down from the Labour Party and gone independent. And so, in a sense, you might say she was up for grabs, and she's been grabbed, she's been signed up, and she's part of the Lib Dem team here. So, I mean, the remarkable thing about Liverpool is it's bucked to the national trend as it so often does. And despite this being the European capital of culture this year, you'd have thought it'd be a rock-solid place for the Lib Dems. It hasn't been, because they've been rated the worst council in the country, because they've had problems in getting that capital culture year up and running, and they've paid that penalty, but ultimately they've done a trade and they've hung on after the votes have been counted.
What do you think they offered her?
I think we'll find out in a few minutes here in the Northwest what was offered to her, but I think they've offered her a home. I think you've got to bear in mind it's quite lonely being an independent councillor, particularly if you're a member of a large group like the Labour group, left there and became an independent. I mean, many politicians like to be part of a bigger team, and at this stage I can't say whether she's been offered a portfolio within the local government here, within the council. That I can't tell you. All I can tell you is she's signed up and she's part of that Lib Dem group of councillors now.
Well, David, it's a lovely story. Thank you very much indeed. Among the critics of Labour we've been talking about this evening, Charles Clarke is certainly probably the most outspoken in his attacks on Gordon Brown, talking about the abolition of the 10p tax rate, the post office closures, and how many MPs were disappointed by policy decisions. Well, here is Charles Clarke's reaction tonight to the results that have come in so far.
We've really got to focus on how we win and what we do. And these are a real message to us from the electorate saying we don't like some of the things we've seen, you've got to get your act together. And that's a message we have to receive and act upon.
It's no secret that you are critical of Gordon Brown. Do you think you can win under him?
I think it's possible, but it would require changes. We have to set out our policy very clearly. He has to get a team which is right. We have to send our message and our purpose in a more convincing way than we have done so far.
A team which is right, Ed Miliband.
Well, I agree with some of what Charles has said. He said we've got to set out what our agenda is in a clear and convincing way. I think that's absolutely right. One thing I want to go back to...
A team which is right, he said.
Look,
if the team is right?
I think we've got a very good team, yes.
You disagree with him on that? No changes?
Well, it's, as I said earlier, it's for the Prime Minister to decide who's in his team. But I think we've got a good team of people. I think we need to use people from across the Labour Party. I think that's what we're doing. Look, I want to go back to something which
if I may,
yeah.
I don't think Charles Clarke is saying that he thinks the team is right. I mean, he's clearly
signalling
signalling that important changes are needed.
Yeah,
and I think
yeah.
Charles Clarke is not suggesting the junior ranks of the cabinet.
No, what do you think?
I think what he's saying is that at the very top of the cabinet, people are not performing in a way that will reassure the public. Now, he's not said it. And maybe he doesn't mean it, but I suspect he has in mind people like the Chancellor Alistair Darling, the Home Secretary Jackie Smith, need to either get a much higher profile to be reassuring or, frankly, to be replaced.
What likelihood do you think there is of a reshuffle?
Well, the indications ahead of these elections was there would be no immediate reshuffle, in part because Tony Blair tried that after disastrous local election results and it never worked for him. They were usually botched reshuffles and they did little to restore his popularity. In the medium term, though, Gordon Brown will have to think if he is playing long, which he surely must now be doing for a general election, perhaps as late as 2010, is there one more chance to change his team to try and get a team that is more reassuring, more able to take the battle to the Tories?
I think the Labour government has a real problem here, which we haven't really talked about, and it's not clear, as Nick was saying a few moments ago, how you address it. There are grave doubts amongst very large numbers of people as to the government's competence, its ability to handle the affair. You used the metaphor earlier on of the ship being steered onto the rocks, but most people think it's being steered onto the rocks in a very wavery kind of uncertain way. As Ed Miliband was suggesting, there's no sense of direction. People don't quite know what this government is about, what it stands for, where it's going. It's supposed to be an anti-poverty government, and yet gets into trouble over specifically a poverty issue. There's a real sense of not knowing what these people are about. Ed Miliband was saying a moment ago that you didn't know what a Tory government would be like, but people don't know what a Labour government is like at the moment. They don't know why it's there, what it's for. Hence all this talk of listening. I wanted to ask Doug Hoyle, he said we'll listen and we'll talk to the people, but what will they say? I mean, Ed Miliband probably knows. I hope he does.
Looking very surprised.
No, not surprised. No. What I would say to you about that is that what we stand for is using the power of government to help people solve some of the problems they see in their own lives. Whether it's, I talked about this earlier, whether it's caring for elderly relatives and the pressures people face in that respect, whether it's wanting GPs opening at the time they need them, whether it's getting on the housing ladder. Now, where you're right, Tony, is that events, and we can name some of them that have happened over the last few months, get in the way of being able to project that. And we obviously have to do better at projecting that message. All of us have to raise our game to do that. But I think that's something very much we can do. And as I said earlier also, I think there will be a focus now on the choice between the Conservatives and Labour. And that is a contrast that we relish, because when it comes to these big issues of substance in the country, I don't think they have answers.
I think it's significant that on the Newsnight poll tonight, when the public were asked about things like which party do you think has the better team then, they came down overwhelmingly to say that Conservative parties, to them, seems to have the better team now for government. And in a factor of 2 to 1, 60% of people said they thought that the Labour Party was more divided than the Conservative Party. So people are making those choices and they're expressing them clearly in the polling.
Not a Newsnight poll, it was our poll.
Your poll.
You know how jealous the BBC is of anybody else in the BBC.
I do apologise.
I have to say, I think, Caroline, you sound extremely, I mean, if I may say so, you sound extremely complacent, I would say, about these results. I mean,
I'm not complacent.
You are quite complacent,
could I just come on that? I'm not complacent because my party's had to rebuild itself with change. And the fact that you accuse me of that tells me you're not listening to what people are saying to you. You need to listen. Say you want to, try it.
We'll leave the tutorial. Tories teach Labour how to win elections, and we've had a lot of results, and we know the overall picture is poor for Labour. But as we were saying earlier on, it does vary in different parts of the country. So let's now go to different parts of the country where you're watching and hear what's been happening there.
Well, I understand you might be expecting from us a little bit of Tory crowing, and we've got a couple of Tory crows here, and Polly Toynbee as well, Michael Portillo, you'll remember, and Fraser Nelson from The Spectator. Let me take to you first, Michael. A very, very positive outcome for the Conservatives on the national share, projected national share.
Yes, although, I mean, 44%, although it's better than the Tories have done recently, is not particularly spectacular for an opposition that's on its way to winning a general election. And I think the Tories ought to be hoping for better than that. I think the really spectacular thing this evening actually is the Labour share at 24%, which is really quite unusual for an opposition to sink that low. But for the Tories to feel confident of winning the next general election, I think they'd want to be higher than that. They'd want to be consistently at a higher number in opinion polls as well as in local elections.
When people were talking about, Labour at 47 in 95, the Tories were throwing out their hands and saying, don't be ridiculous, it's just not going to happen. Isn't this pretty much as good as it would get for them? I don't know why I'm trying to convince you a Tory, but,
Well, I'm a broadcaster like you, actually, but I'm trying to be dispassionate about this. I think the Tories need to have a higher number than the number they're scoring today. This number is good because it's better than what they've had before, but they've not been getting the sort of numbers that Labour got in opposition before Labour became the government. And given that the Tories need to get a much higher percentage to be certain of winning than Labour needs to get to be certain of winning, then the Tories will need to get higher than this to be really comfortable about the next election.
Polly, if that is the most spectacular number tonight, Labour on 24, what has gone wrong? Is this all the 10p tax still?
10p tax certainly gave Labour a huge extra blow. It was destined to do badly tonight anyway. 24 is very bad. It's the worst since records began. And Labour's going to have to go away and do a very serious rethink, and I'm sure they will try.
But I mean, this was what he tried to avoid by climbing down when he did, and yet it seems to have compounded it.
I don't think it's compounded it. He climbed down a bit too late. The mistake was so serious that there was no way out of it, and he should have acknowledged and apologised much earlier. Now he's got to find a fix for it. I think he's got to find a way of taking all of those low-paid people out of tax and taxing the rich more to pay for it. But I don't know if he'll have the guts.
It's quite interesting, Fraser. I was just listening to Caroline Spellman talking about the Labour Party having to listen more to people, and this extraordinary idea of the Conservatives now teaching Labour possibly how to win an election. Have we really got to that?
Well, it does look so, actually. I mean, I've seen the Labour faces, we haven't heard their voices. They all look terrible. Ed Miliband looks like he's seen a ghost. I think they appreciate there's a turning point tonight. As Michael says, this is not enough for the Conservatives to say the next election is ours, but I think it is enough for a lot of Labour MPs to work out thinking this is our worst election, probably since the war, in terms of the share of the votes, and we probably are. It's now probable that they will lose the next election.
What does this do to the mayoral contest then? We're in City Hall, we're in the living room.
We are.
Who's going to be here tomorrow?
Oh, I think Boris Johnson is going to win, and by a reasonable degree as well. That appears to be everything. And just think if you're Gordon Brown, you will now live in a constituency represented by Liberal Democrats, in a country governed by the Scottish National Party, and work in a city governed by the Conservatives. It's a terrible morale blow for Gordon Brown. And I don't think there's any way Boris can lose it now, unless London has gone hugely against the polls in the rest of the country. London is now Conservative, and what a blow for Brown.
And I'm going to come back to that point you made earlier, which is, at this point, the Conservatives, the Camerons and the Osbornes of this world are biting their nails and saying, hang on, how on earth did this happen? We've got Boris in charge.
Yeah, I mean, Boris is a pretty unreliable person. So how exactly he's going to manage the city, I don't know. He's also, it seems to me, the converse of the image that the Tories actually want. I mean, the Tories have spent the last 2 years trying to modernise, and Boris doesn't strike me as a modernising figure at all. He's a kind of throwback to all sorts of traits that actually they don't want to associate with Toryism. So I think it is a double-edged sword, but of course there's no doubt at all that the Tories wanted to win London, needed to win London, and I agree with Fraser, have won London.
And would you accept that? Do you think Ken is now pretty much out of the race? I mean, when you've looked at Ken on the campaign trail this time round and the allegations that have accompanied him, whether you think that's kind of media bias or
been
not?
outrageous. London only has one newspaper, the Evening Standard. It has behaved absolutely disgracefully. It hasn't behaved like a newspaper at all. It's plastered all of its billboards all over London outside every tube station with Ken's scandal. Mostly stories that haven't been taken up by anybody else because they were
Well, I know they're
paper
still being
thin.
investigated, but in terms of what it has done to him as a candidate, do you think it has worn him down?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily worn him down, but I'm sure it will have diminished the vote he would have had. But I think if Labour really is on 24%, he'd have struggled an awful lot to win anyway. He'd have had to buck the trend enormously. And the truth is, it's probably going to be a very sad, bad day for Ken.
A point about the Lib Dems. Nick Clegg was saying last night in that way that they all downgrade expectations. Oh, 20 would be nice. And we know that Nick Clegg rather likes the number 30, but, you know, 25 would probably be... I think we can. But going back to the projected national share, I guess 25 would be a nice note for them.
Especially if it's one more than Labour's on 24. If Liberal Democrats finish second tonight, this is great for Nick Clegg. He expected to do pretty badly because, don't forget, 4 years ago, they were winning anti-war votes of Labour. They expected those votes to go back. It seems Lib Dems have held on to it. This, against all expectations, is actually quite a good night for Nick Clegg.
Okay.
Silver's pretty good.
Fraser Nelson and Mike Portillo. Holly Toynbee, thank you all very much indeed. That's all from us here at City Hall.
The result from Birmingham. Now, nobody could take Birmingham. It's too divided. But here are the results from Birmingham. It's still a hung council. The Conservatives, an overall gain of 6. Labour, overall down 6. Liberal Democrats on 32, no change. And Respect Party is up 1. The party George Galloway founded. Hastings in East Sussex, a hung council, Conservatives on 15, up 1, Labour up 1, and the Liberal Democrats down 2. Amber Valley, the Conservatives hold on to Amber Valley, they go up 1, Labour overall down 3, and the BNP gain 2 seats in Amber Valley. And Anglesey or Ynysmore, a hung council, it's the first Welsh council we've had in, I think, tonight. Plaid Cymru up 2. Labour up 5. The Conservatives up 1. Liberal Democrats up 1. And others down 9. But there are still 23 others, whoever the others are, independents.
Result we all like.
In Wales, the independents are... I don't know who are the independents in Wales. Do you claim them as Conservatives?
So I think what's very interesting at this election is the number of independents in Wales who have actually declared themselves as Conservatives. And
But a lot of people always suspected independents were really Conservatives.
Well, you can understand that. You know, think of the Labour heartlands and the valleys. It was difficult because our party's rehabilitated. It gets easy to get off the fence and say you're really a Conservative.
I think a quarter or something of councillors in Wales are
Yes,
independent.
and that's one of the reasons we've been able to field more candidates also at this election in Wales than ever before. It's a restoration.
It's been a sort of undercover movement of the Conservative Party in
well,
Wales.
It works.
Jeremy.
Yes, thank you, David.
Rejoin us
Well,
through the snowstorm.
Yeah, here we are. It's blowing a gale. Well, the snow's not really moving considering the wind in the studio, but it's cold in here. And I was mentioning earlier, did you have this in your classroom wall at school, the ascent of man, how ape gradually moved up to become Homo erectus, man standing tall and straight. And we were just asking, weren't we, whether that is somehow the story of the Conservative progression. If we look back at John Major in 1995... Get right down here. There he was on a very low share in those local elections, 26%. And gradually you see these Conservative leaders straightening up. The next one, there, William Hague, 1998, 33%. Still, though, with that stoop, that needs a bit of therapy there on the spine, I think. IDS, Ian Duncan Smith, 2002, there he is, not straight enough to win a general election, 35%, walking taller, but not quite there. And the same was true, wasn't it, of Michael Howard? Yes, Howard, 38%, thought he might win the general in 05, but didn't. So now we come to the end of the progression and to David Cameron. And in a sense, he was ascended already because he had that 40%, that magic number, last year and the year before in the local elections. We were asking what would happen tonight. He might be worried go below that would be a serious reverse. Even staying at 40 might have been seen as them treading water. Well, that hasn't happened. Here is the new percentage for the Conservatives. Our projected national share tonight, 44%, a truly fabulous result for them, which leaves Mr Cameron standing alone. And behind him, all the other leaders that Labour knocked over. Oh. Back to you.
You have such fun there, Jeremy.
I know.
You're a lucky man. And we sit here talking statistics. We're joined by Professor John Curtis of Strathclyde University, I hope. John, we've been looking at your figures.
Hello, David.
Hello. Well, it's been an interesting night for you because normally all the politicians leap on your figures and start complaining because it doesn't show it quite the way they'd like to see it. Tonight, everybody seems to have been happily accepting, or not happily, but anyway, accepting them.
Yes, indeed. Well, of course, it is a very, very clear result. I mean, I think perhaps the most important thing to say is that the opinion polls have been suggesting over the last couple of months or so that the Conservatives were now in a stronger position than at any time since Black Wednesday back in September 1992. Now we have a set of local election results which are also the best for the Conservatives since 1992, when the local elections took place just after the general election. So we now have the opinion polls and the ballot box telling the same story. It's not a story, of course, that means the Conservatives are bound to win the next election, but it is a story that says that the Conservatives are now seriously more popular than they have been at any time since the disaster of Black Wednesday, which broke the back of John Major's government.
What about the Liberal Democrats?
Well, I think Liberal Democrats, in the end, as it were, I heard some of your earlier discussion about whether Labour had fallen into third or the Liberal Democrats again second. I think my view is, frankly, the Labour Party has fallen into third place, and they've just simply overtaken the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats, for that slot, rather than the Liberal Democrats doing particularly well. If you look at the votes for the Liberal Democrats tonight and compare it ward by ward with what they achieved last year, they're down a little bit, not a lot, but certainly the percentage point or so that our projected national share suggests does seem to be right. So it's actually a little bit worse for the Liberal Democrats so far as votes are concerned compared with last year. But of course, they're able to pick up seats from Labour because Labour are doing so badly, and that compensates for the losses they're suffering to the Conservatives.
But their share of the vote, then, if you go back to 2004, the Liberal Democrat vote goes 29, 28, 27, 26, 25 this year.
It does indeed, yes. The Liberal Democrats are on a gentle slide. And the truth is that tonight does nothing to reverse the impression that the Liberal Democrats are on a gentle slide down from the post-Iraq war high.
Can that be recovered, do you think, Vince Cable?
Almost certainly so. And as I said earlier, I mean, I think the fact that we've actually overtaken Labour is psychologically and politically very important.
But John Curtis just says it's not by your deeds that you've overtaken Labour, but by Labour's misdeeds that they've fallen behind you.
Well, I think we acknowledge the fact that in 2004 we were at a peak and we capitalised on the fact that we'd made the right judgment about the Iraq war and captured the public mood at the time.
When you say you're at a peak, you mean that's it?
No, we're going to get back to that, but certainly over the last few years we've struggled to maintain that level. But I think if you look at particular areas, we've done exceptionally well in areas where we've got held MP seats. So if you look at, for example, Colchester, that was against the trend, you've got Rochdale, you've got Cheltenham, where we're up against the Tories.
Does it do any good picking out these particular examples?
It does, because last year we had, by every count, a bad night. But actually, if you went to the seats which were held by Lib Dem members of Parliament, we're actually doing extremely well. I mean, Eastland was a good example. We won almost all the council seats. We had a sitting MP with Chris Hume with a majority of under 1,000. And I think you'll find that across the board we've done extremely well in those areas where we were strong and built a reputation for competence.
Okay, Nick, you had your hand there first.
The great anxiety, I think, for Liberal Democrats, and Mr Cable made, choose to agree or disagree with this, is that traditionally, as Labour has fallen back over a period of decades, often the Liberal Democrats have struggled a little bit as well. Now, if in addition to that historical fact, you add the fact that they now haven't found a new cause after the Iraq War, and they're on their third leader now, and that hasn't done the trick. It is not a crisis for them by any stretch of the imagination, but they are having to sit and think, well, now what do we do? What is it? We've got to do there isn't an obvious policy solution at the moment. It's a long, hard graft, delivers in certain areas, as Vince Gable said, but not in others, and it is nothing like the success that they enjoyed a few years ago.
Two thoughts, David. One was simply, Vince Gable alluded to this, it's true. If you look at the projected national share of the Liberal Dems over the last few years, it looks like this: 2004, 29, 2005, 28, 2006, 27, 2007, 26, 2008, 25. It doesn't look terribly from the Democrat point of view. One other thought I think ought to be brought before is very serious for Labour. If you look at the elections of 1997, 2001, 2005, the Labour Party benefited hugely in terms of number of seats by tactical voting, with very large numbers of people who would probably otherwise vote for the Liberal Democrat, opting instead to vote Labour, where the Liberal Democrats had no chance. The opinion polls, this hasn't been picked up by the way, are now suggesting that Liberal Democrats in similar situations, where both them and locally has no chance, are much more evenly divided. And a lot of the projections that are offered votes to seats simply go on the assumption that the future will be like the past. It's had to go on and then Labour. I think it's going to benefit the Labour Party very little in this election, and could even harm the Labour Party.
We've been joined by Ian Gibson, Labour MP for Norwich. Mr. Gibson, you may have heard some of the things people have been saying in your party about the need to listen. What's your message to Gordon Brown and the like these results?
Well, it's quite clear that they've been pushed around, particularly over the issue of the Indian tax. That resonated people on the doorstep. We've done quite a bit of canvassing here in Norwich over the last few weeks, and we've been hearing that time and again. The parties, the opposition parties, used in their last-minute leaflets to try and make sure that we were credited on it, obviously, as big to some extent. And having said that, in Norwich, the Labour Party is over control and sort of local council. The Greens, who are prominently in second place, 2 seats behind the Labour, and have come force, whilst the Liberal Democrats here in Norwich have more or less crumbled.
What's the message to the government?
Well, the message is there are specific things that you must hold of in the way that we did with the 1997 pledge. We're going to do things like the railway. Should we be talking about nationalisation again? Should we be thinking about care for the elderly? What about the agency workers having full trade union rights that other people in this country do? And issues like that bring deeply, I think, in population. And of course, there's the whole business of minimum wages, pensioners, the relation back to salaries, wages, which they take away by the Conservatives, but it's not fully restored yet, and really needs to be done now.
Can Gordon Brown capture the imagination of the electorate, do you think, in time for an election?
The message is there for him to do it. We're there to help him. If he's listening, then he must come and tell us right away that despite all the bad mistakes in the last few weeks over the taxes, we can get it right again. It's a real challenge. We deserve to be there. We've done so many good things, and we can't carry on doing that. This message is over.
Is he capable of doing that?
Yes, I do think he is. I think he's got a new team of advisors there. They really need to get their act together, learn what people are saying, come come out on the doorstep and listen to what people are saying in this country. Don't get stuck, in the box of Whitehall and Westminster. It really would do them good to come and hear what's going on and to react to that and to give the people something that, gives them a life, which is exciting, enthusiastic, and for the young people of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Nick?
Thank you.
On the one hand, Charles Clarke pops up, MP for Norwich, and says that what he has to do is listen to me, change his team, and the education is moving in a more Blairite direction. On the other, Ian Gibson pops up and says, no, you should listen to me, you should give people more in the way of minimum wage and so on. We're here to help, says one of the most serial rebels in the House of Commons who votes against the party as often as he possibly can. Not the sort of help I suspect that Gordon Brown will embrace all that enthusiastically. But everyone will now believe that they uniquely have a view about how Gordon Brown should rescue it. That makes his job hard.
You think there's going to be anarchy in the Labour Party, do you?
Well, anarchy is taking much too strongly, but I do think he will be hauled now by people in the Labour Party saying, well, actually, we really know what you should do, and you don't. You admitted you got it wrong on 10p tax. That will make it hard for him to have a steady course.
People have overlooked the fact that huge numbers of people now think the Labour Party is divided, and I mean that to be taken very seriously. The last poll asked people whether the Labour Party was united or divided. The proportion who said that they thought the party was united was 7%. 7.
United.
7% of people, they must have just come back from a holiday in Kenya or Australia or somewhere, thought the Labour Party was united, and those figures are exactly the same as they were when the Labour Party was led, if that's the right term, by Michael Foot in the early 1980s. That's serious. I happen not to believe that the Labour Party is divided in the way that very large numbers of people do, but it's public perceptions that matter.
Let's have a look at the result we've had in from Thurrock, and this stays hung. 24 Conservative, no change. 22 Labour, no change. The BNP up 1. That should have been a seat the Conservatives took. Thurrock in Essex. Right, and let's go and find. Well, the new word for the grassroots seems to be the bloggers, who are meant to have their ear to the ground. God knows whether they do, but anyway, they're with Emily Maitlis. Let's join them.
Hello, yes, I'm back with my bloggers, ear to the ground or not. There is some breaking news from each of our bloggers who tell us this is the heaviest night's traffic that they've had in a single go. But it does seem that the mood, the sort of traffic is now starting to slow down a little bit. We've had the projected national share, lots of chatter and Twitter and stuff about that. As you can imagine, we'll have a little bit more on that in a moment. But first I'm going to take you to our Labour activist, Luke Akehurst, who said just a moment ago, and I quote, "This is the dangerous bit where I now start to destroy my political career." Do let us help you, Luke. What are you writing?
Thanks for that. Well, I was going to write a more reflective piece because I've been doing, talking up some of the good results Labour's had in places like Liverpool and Oxford. But it'd be foolish to pretend this hasn't been a difficult night, and a lot of councillors have lost their seats, and that's a great shame. And I think we need to think about why that's happened. To my mind, we were heading for quite a good set of results until the 10p issue really started to hit home in people's pay packets in April, and that's a completely self-inflicted wound, and so it's a great shame.
So what are you writing now that you think will destroy? Because actually, talking about the 10 pence tax is no different to most of the Labour rebels, right?
The difference I would have with Labour rebels is that I think the new Labour brand isn't necessarily solid. That actually the public like the combination of economic efficiency and tough on crime and social justice that New Labour stands for. It's just the 10p thing made them think that actually maybe we'd lost sight of the social justice element of that, and we need to get back to the fundamentals of what it was that won us free general elections.
Alex Mortimer, you are nodding very sagely, like a nodding sage Lib Dem. Go on, tell us what you've added.
We were, of course, the only party to notice the 10p problem last year when the budget came out. And to vote against it. Well,
but in terms of what you're kind of writing now and what your feel is, you must be pretty happy with where you're sitting now.
You're extremely
above Labour.
Yes, we're above Labour. We are now apparently the second party in the country. It's fantastic news. We haven't, as far as I can see, we've held about steady. We're on about minus net -3 or something last time I looked. So we've held it steady. We had
What
great
happens
results
now?
in
Do
2004.
you said this was the heaviest night's traffic you'd had.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. I won't ask how many because that might just
Well,
kill it all
it's
for
less
us.
than a tenth of Ian Dale's traffic on a normal day.
It's not size that counts, Alex.
Absolutely.
We're going to have the projected national share of our bloggers blogging soon, aren't we? But Alex, just take us through a couple of comments.
Well, everyone's sort of getting, like Luke says, everyone's getting more reflective. Someone on Lib Dem Voice is sort of wondering whether Conservative Home, which is the sort of Conservative hub, although it's not an official party site, Conservative Home had called it for Boris, as I think Ian blogged earlier, called Boris for Mayor. And Lib Dem Voice, people are wondering whether that was wise, you know, might they look a little bit silly? So that's sort of one thing that's going on. Someone else has summed up a good. This is how the night has been for Labour. Poor Gordon. He lives in a Lib Dem constituency. His country is governed by the SNP, and his city is about to go Conservative.
I think that's what Fraser Nelson said to me a minute ago. Ian, is there any Tory crowing by any chance?
I think people are trying not to crow, but obviously I think this is probably the best Conservative night since 1968 when there was another Labour wipeout. So there's a lot of very happy people on sites like Conservative Home. But a lot of people are questioning what the Tories would have to do to satisfy Michael Portillo, because we've been hearing the interviews that he's done with you, and he clearly lives on a different planet to the rest of us.
Well, he doesn't, to be fair, call himself a Tory anymore. He calls himself a broadcaster.
Well, he should remember the party that made him, perhaps, because it's really weird when he says, oh, 44% isn't good enough. He must be the only Tory in the country that thinks that.
But what are the Tories doing now? I mean, David Cameron's gone to bed happy, presumably. Are your guys tailing off now? Is this where you get reflective?
Yeah, I mean, people are obviously moving away. I suspect your viewing figures will are probably declining at the moment too. And I think people are now, their minds are turning to tomorrow and what's going to happen in London, because frankly, that result will eclipse anything that's happened tonight, because if the Conservatives win that, it's a clean sweep.
It is the biggest story in town, isn't it? Thank you all very much. We'll let you know as soon as Luke tells us if he has in fact destroyed his political career or not. It could take another hour. We'll bring it to you live.
Thanks very much, Emily. Well, now, let's just have a look at what we've got in here. Conservative Norwich Council, Hung Council, Labour on 15. The figures have absolutely vanished from my screen. I suppose they have from... We haven't got it.
Can I say something about Norwich, just to fill in, because it's a very interesting place. The Greens are now the official opposition. They are the second party on the Norwich City Council. They've gained 3 seats. They now have 13. The Liberal Democrats have gone down 5 and have only 6. So this is, I think, I'm doing this from memory, the only council in the country that has a Green party as one of the 2 top parties.
Here are the figures now. Labour on 15. The Greens overall gain 3. The Liberal Democrats lose 5 in Norwich, and the Conservatives are up 2. That's the message from Norwich. And I hope we might be able to show you the gains and losses there have been so far in councils. Conservative gains we have here. Harlow, Nuneaton and Bedworth, which was taken control from Labour. West Lindsey from the Liberal Democrats. Southampton and Harlow both from no overall control. And here are another 4. Elmbridge, Wyre Forest, Maidstone and Bury, all of which were no overall control, are now Conservative administrations. And 1 loss, Colchester, that goes to no overall control. And Labour losses, Nuneaton and Bedworth, of course, the Conservatives, and Hartlepool goes to no overall control. And the Liberal Democrats gain control of Hull from no overall control, and St Albans. And they've lost control. Well, we're not sure about Liverpool because of all the shenanigans. But anyway, Pendle certainly lost in overall control, and West Lindsey straight to the Conservatives. So those are the Liberal Democrat positions. Let's... you haven't seen this, Vince, I don't think. Jeremy Vine telling the Liberal Democrat story. You have to see it. Jeremy.
David, I'm going to spare you the Texan accent. Hi, we're in the saloon bar, and here I am ready to shoot some cans off the counter, and I won't inflict the accent that alarmed all those Lib Dem bloggers so much. But look at 2004 here. I hope this gun is going to work. I should shot straight earlier on. Nick Clegg, I hope you're watching this. Have a look. Okay, 29% 2004. The leader then, of course, Charles Kennedy. He then led the party into the general election where they scored 23%. And then in 2007, last year, this was the local election score. I'll see if I can shoot this one off the counter as well. Good, 3 in a row, 26%. OK, Nick Clegg, let's have a look at you. We've got the Lib Dem leader here in his cowboy leathers. He's in the saloon bar, and you can see that there's one tin can left there, which says 2008. See if you can knock that one off, Mr. Clegg. And he's missed. And it says 25% there. And that, as we have been saying, is worse than Ming Campbell. And you start to wonder if this town might become a slightly dangerous place for the Liberal Democrat leader if he can't use a gun. Right. So we ask the question, does 25% leave Nick Clegg looking like Calamity Clegg? Back to you.
You've left Vince Cable looking bemused, a rather more academic than he usually, slightly disapproving, I suspect.
Jeremy's got a strange graph. He's somehow got 23% as more than 25%, which is baffling me somewhat.
You're so sharp. Only you would spot that. We were just discussing that earlier on. You're right. It's the bullet from my gun hit that can with such velocity it moved higher than it should have been.
Well, you made life much easier for me.
You want to have heard it all in Texan. It's even more impressive.
Yes.
But 25, he says he'll be run out of town. You say he won't be run out of town.
No, he won't be run out of
and
town.
And the slow decline doesn't worry you either.
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you go back to, the year I got into Parliament, 1997, big breakthrough, double the number of MPs. We went into that election, I think this was the great Paddy Ashdown election, with just over 10%, and I think had 16% on the night, but we greatly expanded our share in Parliament. And I think it's a combination of having strength in particular areas, doing well in them, building up a reputation as MPs, local councils, and we've continued to do that. And I think the key headline actually will not be that decline or that rather odd graph that you've got there, but it will be the fact that we've overtaken Labour, and who are now in third place as a result of these elections.
Okay. Ed Miliband.
Well, it's obviously been a disappointing night for us. This is one of the things that does happen at mid-term elections. I suppose I want to pick up on something that Ian Gibson said earlier on. I don't agree with everything he said. He was talking about people's sense of fairness, and I think that is an important thing. Clearly, the Tempe was an issue for us in this respect. We've made amends on that. But I think showing that we speak to people's sense of fairness in this country seems to me to be a very important thing. And actually, I relish an argument with the Conservatives in the next period about who can better speak to people's sense of fairness in this country and solve some of the issues that people are raising.
The former Labour Chief Whip, Hilary Armstrong, who stood down from Parliament in 2007, is listening to this in Durham. Stood down, sorry, as Chief Whip.
Stood down from government.
Yes, stood down from
David.
government. I know. It's a typical presenter to think that means standing down from Parliament.
It's early in the morning.
It is early morning. Hilary, what do you think of what's gone on? You just heard what Ed Miliband said.
Yes, Ed always speaks a lot of sense. We in Durham here, we have held on. We've not had a good night. But, you know, in many senses, the other two parties haven't really had a good night in Durham either. The Liberals have increased the number of seats, but I don't think they've done as well as they might have done. So, you know, for all of us, we've got to learn, we've got to listen, we've got to engage with people. This, of course, is a new council, and that in itself was quite controversial. So, you know, we're going to have to show in running this council that we can reach out to people, that we can really engage with people, and that they do feel that the new council is able to meet their needs and their aspirations.
You talk about the Durham, and of course the Durham council is what's called a shadow council, isn't it? The unitary one. It won't actually take power for a year. But just coming to Westminster...
Except that all the councillors begin tomorrow, and they are, in essence, the new council. There will still be districts for another year, but they are the new county council.
All right. But you talk about what's going on in Durham, but what about what's going on at Westminster and in government? You talk about the need to engage. You've had 11 years to engage. Are you saying you still haven't engaged?
Oh, you've got to do that anew, again and again and again. And that's what you learn when you're in government, that all the good things you do they just get pocketed, as we say. And you've always got to be looking to how you can really make sure that the renewed anxieties, the renewed aspirations, people's expectations are rising every year, and I welcome that. But it gives us new challenges.
But surely it's not expectations.
Got to make sure we meet those challenges.
It's not expectations that are rising. Surely at the moment it's the horror of what they see happening around them, to mortgages, to interest rates, for the lower paid with the 10% tax rate, for the people between 60 and 64 on pensions who suddenly lost out under a Labour government. Of people today, as being referred to, with old motor cars who suddenly find they're going to have to pay £400 tax for running an old banger. They're the people who are worried.
Well, there are huge challenges, and you're right that those around the economy are the challenges of the moment, in a sense. But, David, if you look in this region at the huge changes that there have been over the last 11 years, those changes are so significant that, yes, there are problems now, but we don't have anything like the levels of unemployment that we had. But that is where, as I say, people's expectations are rising. They accept now that stable employment and stable levels of unemployment, you know, we've reduced those hugely in this region. They want to build on that. They don't want to go back from that. And so, yes, there are concerns about the economy worldwide, I might say. And this economy, with this Prime Minister who has led that economy so well over the last 11 years, we've just got to make sure that we keep hold of the economy, don't let it go into recession, and keep working with people.
But Hilary Armstrong,
you can't be in government.
But if you talk about,
hang on
a second. You talk about the changes in the northeast. You talk about the regeneration of the area. It must be dismaying to you that overall the result of this is a 20% point gap between the Conservatives and Labour. That whatever's happening, the Conservatives are getting 44% tonight, and Labour 24%. People are turning to the Conservatives.
You can't be in government for all of this time without people looking for different things from you and looking for new things from you. And, you know, I've had the example, I think I've had a Conservative elected in my constituency for the first time for I don't know how long. But I have to say, you had to work very hard to work out she was a Tory. She had the best literature I've ever seen. And her slogan was, no politics, no spin, no promises. Well, you know, as I say, you had to work out really hard she was a Conservative. And what she learnt was people are really rather disaffected with politics. And so she appealed to that. And they also thought she was energetic, she was young, and all of those things. But most of them didn't have a clue she was Tory. So, you know, they've made a gain in my constituency, but I suspect we're going to work on that and get that one back in the next time we have elections.
Hilary Armstrong, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. We rejoin Betsan Powys in Wales for news from Merthyr. Betsan.
Yes, that's right. News from Merthyr that Labour have lost control of Merthyr. Big gains, substantial gains, of some 6 seats for the Liberal Democrats there. Now, they had targeted Merthyr, they had targeted the Labour leader, Harvey Jones, and he has apparently been ousted. So another a notch there for the Lib Dems, although I gather from Bridgend, where they had been leading the council for the past 4 years, that Labour now believe that they can lead Bridgend by striking a deal with the independents. We'll find out about that sort of thing, not by tomorrow morning, but over the next few days. But another story to tell you as well, the Plaid Cymru story that is emerging. Now, they are, of course, now in coalition with Labour and had been wondering what effect that might have on this vote. Now, this is how it seems to be at the moment. And this really is coming from Plaid sources that in Gwynedd, in their heartland, they are really taking some hits. There has been a big issue there about the closure and federation of small rural schools. A protest group, Llais Gwynedd, Gwynedd's Voice, has taken on some of Plaid's Plaid's bigger names, and it looks as though there might be some big scalps there. Talk of the Plaid Cymru president possibly being ousted. Now, they had half expected that. In Ceredigion, though, the parliamentary perspective candidate for Plaid Cymru looks as though he has lost his seat as well. They seem to be doing better in the valleys than in their heartland, so they will be asking some serious questions of themselves, I'm sure, over the next few hours.
And thank you very much indeed. Let's join Emily Maitlis back in City Hall there. Emily.
Actually, David, shivering outside City Hall, which is, if the projected national share is right, where Ken Livingstone may find himself by this time tomorrow. Let's talk about that with Polly Toynbee and Michael Portillo. Do you think the game's over for Ken, Polly?
Well, if the figures at the moment are right, he would have to have a remarkable personal result to buck the trend of his party. And he is, after all, more associated with his party than he used to be. He, first of all, won as a maverick. He won as an anti-Labour candidate. And this time he's been campaigning with both Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. And he's very much a Labour candidate, really. And he has made his peace with the Labour Party and indeed has extracted large sums of money out of the Treasury in recent years when Gordon Brown was there to pay for huge infrastructure projects, to pay for Crossrail, to pay for a lot of money on the tube and the buses and that kind of thing.
But extraordinary. I mean, given how long, Michael's earlier point, given how long it took the Tory party to even find a candidate for mayor, that they could unseat the incumbent of well, not just 2 terms, but as you say, broadly, his whole political life.
Yes, I think it'll be a very sad moment for Ken if that's what's really happened. He's devoted his whole life to London. It's the only thing he really cares about. He's truly devoted to the cause and has made the mayoralty something very much in his own image, which will be a hard act to follow.
Michael, what do you think happened on that campaign from day one to now with Boris? Because I was talking to Stanley, Boris's dad, who said, the media portrayed him as a buffoon and a comic. Of course he isn't. He's a serious, intelligent man who, can put his foot in it as Ken can. What do you think changed?
Well, he's an intelligent man. I don't know whether I'd use the word serious. Well, what changed, I think, was that people turned against Ken Livingstone and that we live in an era of celebrity politics. So a man who's been on Have I Got News For You is someone that, people associate with and are prepared to...
Ken's been on Have I Got News For You more times than he has, I think.
And Ken's won 2 remarkable election victories. I think it is time to talk about Ken in the past tense. My obituary on him would be that he's actually been a remarkable figure in London. I mean, 28 years ago, we used to mock him for being in favour of gay rights and lesbian rights, and that's now become kind of mainstream. He's been, I think, the boldest politician, with the possible exception of Tony Blair, in the last 2 decades. He brought in the congestion charge, whatever you think about it, it was very bold. The Oyster card, which works. Been in favour of tall buildings, which is an extremely unpopular cause. So I think he has been a remarkable figure, actually.
And Boris has said he's going to cut down on crime, that basically Londoners live in fear of their neighbourhoods, of their streets, of their platforms, when they're catching the tube.
Yeah, it's all
That's it.
Crime has just fallen by a remarkable 12%. I mean, crime hasn't just fallen in this city, it's fallen right across Europe. It's amazing how much crime has fallen by. People are afraid of crime because opposition politicians stir up fear to it. The worst thing about Boris's plans is that he says he's going to cut Ken Livingstone's project for having 50% of all new housing affordable housing. Boris is going to be a mayor for the rich, I'm afraid, not for the poor.
OK, thank you both. It's very interesting. We know them both as Ken and Boris. I just heard Polly talk about Ken Livingstone there. There's something about using somebody's surname now that suggests they might be in the past tense. David.
Emily, thanks very much indeed. Let's have a look at now how things stand overall. And we've got a new gang of politicians, I'm glad to say, with us. Refreshing the programme. We'll be with them in a moment. Oh, well, there they are. Andy Burnham, Eric Pickles, Sarah Tether, for the Liberal Democrats. This is the evidence that we put before them. On councils, first of all, this is the state of play on control of councils. The Conservatives are currently up 7. Labour are down 3. The Liberal Democrats are down 1. And there are 3 fewer, no overall control. And on councillors, the running total at the moment, Conservatives up 124, Labour down 108, Liberal Democrats up 1 and others down 17. 382 others, let's just see how they're made up. 23 of them are Green and they're up by 3. Plaid Cymru are up 3 on 19. The BNP hugely up relative to its the small number they had before. They're now on 11. That's up a net 8. Respect is up 1 and 4, and UKIP are up 2 at 4. So there have been gains right across the board for the people who normally appear just as others. The projected share steadied down now to this 44%. The Conservatives, this is the share of the vote projected from key wards today throughout England and Wales. Labour on 24, worst they've had for 40 years. Liberal Democrats on 25, a steady slide from where they were in 2004, others on 7. So, Eric Pickles, Shadow Minister for Communities and Local Government, you were in charge of this whole thing. Your cup's running over tonight.
Well, I will feel slightly pleased with what's happened, particularly, I think, because we've now killed any suggestion that we can't make progress in the north of England. The results in the north have been very pleasing. Results in the southwest have been very pleasing. And I think we've managed a share of the vote and a number of seats that commentators were saying would be impossible for us to reach. So obviously I'm rather pleased. Is there a danger of thinking from this that the election's in the bag? The general election? We'd be very foolish if we thought that. I suspect these results mean that it's at least 2 years away. A lot can happen in 2 years, but I can't help but feel that the ship of state is heading towards the rocks. What's still to be done for the Tory party if they're to achieve a victory at a general election? Well, I mean, you've seen these things lots of times. What I think is likely to happen as we move through the summer, a lot more attention is going to be on us. I think we saw that in the race to the mayor. As soon as Boris looked like he was definitely a serious contender, an awful lot of attention went on what his policies were going to be. So throughout the summer we'll be unveiling some ideas. But I think what we're pleased about, Andy, and I mean maybe this time you made your run for leader, maybe this could be your big opportunity. This could be the tipping point of the Brown administration where you can perhaps fight out between yourself and Mr Miliband who could be the next leader. But I think what we will be doing is increasing our representation in the north of England and continuing not only in policy but also in those rather important things that David's been doing in terms of increasing our infrastructure. Okay. Another little bit of bad news for you, Andy Burnham, before we come to you. Yes, you can add to your punishment. Merthyr Tydfil, the unitary council, Labour loss. That's extraordinary. Labour lose 9 seats in Merthyr. Liberal Democrats gain 6.
Fantastic result, absolutely fantastic.
Steady
result.
on, Sarah Tether, we'll come to you in a moment. And others up 3, 19, which must be independents, I suspect, of all kinds. Are there? I don't know whether we can break down the others in this council. We can't, okay. So, Andy Burnham, what do you think has gone wrong? I mean, and please don't say what everybody else of your party has been saying. You've got to listen, and this is the, global economic problems. You've heard it all. Just say something original about what's got to happen.
No pressure there, then.
Long night, isn't it?
At 3 o'clock in the morning. Thank you very much, David. Well, let me say 2 things. I think it is unprecedented. You say 40 years, the worst projected national share. Well, we're in unprecedented territory. I mean, we have never had a Labour government of this length. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is I don't think the economy has featured in an election in Britain in the way it has at this one for some time. I'm out on the doorstep in Leeds today. People are talking about food prices, fuel prices, general uncertainty and raising issues around the economy. And that's a new thing too. And I think that does come back onto the incumbent government perhaps more than other issues. But you're saying they're blaming a Chancellor whose virtues as Chancellor have been constantly extolled before he became Prime Minister. They've now suddenly turned on him and are blaming him for what's happened to the economy. Is that what's happening? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that people are feeling the pinch in their domestic finances. Why should they turn on the government? Why should they turn to the Tories because of that? Well, I'm not saying that they should. I say... No, but that's what they're doing, according to your analysis. No, I think tonight people have voted possibly on the economy, but I think people have voted on a whole range of different issues. And I don't think the results tonight are sending any one message, actually. I think they are... In places, we've actually had some pretty good results, actually. I would say in Liverpool, we've had a very good result in the North West. Eric says big strides in the north. I don't see it, to be honest. I don't see any real inroads in Liverpool or Manchester. The real inner cities.
That's pretty close to Manchester, isn't it?
Well, I mean, Bury always was and has been. I'm not saying that you've not made progress. Clearly, you've got a foothold now, Eric, where there was not one there before. But I would just caution against reading too much into them.
But you're cherry picking results, because the overall result, the projected national share, is what I was talking about. And the gap of 20 is in... When was the last gap of 20 between Tories and Labour?
Oh, that's an easy question to answer. Never.
There you are.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to say that these are a good set of results. Of course not. I mean, these look like they will be a disappointing set of results. We've got more to come tomorrow on the Yorkshire side of the north, particularly. So we'll see what they say. But of course, these look like a disappointing set of results for the Labour Party. Now, what I was trying to say is that I think there are a number of complex reasons behind that. I will say what other ministers are saying, because this is what we have to do. We have to digest those results. We have to reflect upon them. And then we have to respond in the right way. I'm actually confident we will do that. And if we're to make the comparison between the major government of the early 90s and the position we're in today, we actually are well placed to stand the economic uncertainty. And actually, I would say we have a very united cabinet and Labour Party.
Yeah. Sarah Tether, from the Liberal Democrats' point of view, what do you make of it? It's been, I mean, you've had some successes. You actually seem to have gained control of Liverpool by coaxing a former Labour councillor at the count after the vote was in. This is...
Well, I suspect it demonstrates the unpopularity of Labour on the ground, that even an independent is prepared to defect on the night to keep Labour out. I mean, whatever the result in Liverpool, I have to say I'm proud of our record there. We have transformed that city, and whatever the future is, that
one star according to the Audit Commission, the worst financially.
You need to go a little bit more often.
But if you, I was there only a month or so ago.
The worst administered council in the
Yeah, that's based on finances. That's based on finances.
Well,
when you
what is
actually
local
look at
government
the
about
others,
if it's not finance?
Forget about the finance.
Quite important.
All right, let me finish. All right, you've had your go, Eric, at length. But I mean, if you look at the result, for example, on education, where it was a failing council when the Liberal Democrats took over, it was going to be education was going to be privatised. Now it's 3-star. You look at regeneration. You look at sports facilities. They have made a huge difference. But I mean, I do actually think I'm personally quite relieved by the results so far this evening. As my colleague Vince Cable was saying earlier on in the evening, we were at a very high watermark in 2004. Labour was then extremely unpopular. The Conservatives had Michael Howard. As I said, let me finish.
Sarah,
yeah, and he's giving time.
You were you did well in 2004 because you had a strong policy, as Charles Kennedy explained at the beginning of this programme, which won a lot of support, which was opposition to the Iraq War. Once that began to fade, you too have faded. You've gone 29, 28, 27, 26, now 25.
Yeah, but there is a chance that we'll be pushing Labour into third place this evening. And that is, that's only happened once before, and that was in 2004. And we are making gains at Labour's expense, and we are also making gains at the Conservatives' expense in the marginal seats.
Cat bounce out of this set of elections.
In the marginal seats.
Look, okay,
Eric, think about those seats that you want back from us. Think about Cheltenham. Think about Eastleigh. Where's your smile then?
Okay. Because we could lay a whole load of things. Look, you've got the world's worst unpopular government, and you can't even increase your position.
Right. Let's look to tomorrow for a moment. Let's look to tomorrow for a moment, because there may be worse news, or it may be that Ken Livingstone wins in London, which may show he's not. But we'll just join Jeremy Vine for a moment and see what he has to say about this. Jeremy.
So, what was your favourite cartoon when you were younger, or your favourite comic? Was it the Whoopi or Dandy or Beano? We've put together some of the cartoon characters with the help of Patrick Blur, people who've populated the mayoral contest since the job was reincarnated in 2000. And, of course, the biggest one of the lot is Ken Livingstone there. Do you remember? He was a member of the Labour Party before that first contest. He wanted to stand. They didn't want him to. He got the Monty Python boot. So then it becomes a contest between Mr. Livingstone and Desperate Dobbo. Frank Johnson against Red Ken. Let's see how they get on. Watch out for that ruler, Ken. Always nastiest between colleagues. Result of that, Ken was on his own to face the Conservative Nozza Norris. They had a fight too. I'm going to get down this time. Someone shouted something about the congestion charge, and it all kicked off. The result of that, 58%, 2000 to Ken Livingstone, 42% to Steve Norris. Spool forwards 4 years, 2004, same two again. Ken's put down his Bentley window and picked up a Bentley bus. And the result, it was a bit closer this time, 55% to Ken Livingstone, Red Ken, and Nozza Norris on 45%. So that was the state of play in 2004. Well, then, of course, things change, don't they? And we have two new candidates on the block. Red Ken, Lord Snooty Johnson, and PC Paddock. And what a rumble this has turned out to be this year. It's been uglier than ever. It's over crime. It's over corruption in City Hall, taxation, and all kinds of other things. Boris Johnson had a plan to make the traffic lights green for longer. They've ended up battered and bruised. We don't know how they're doing because they're not counting the votes yet. That's one of the frustrations about tonight. We can look back at the polls, though. Let's go back to January and see what the internet polls were saying. 44% for Ken, 40% for Boris. So Ken with a clear lead, Red Ken. But by March, this had happened in those internet polls. Have a look at this. Boris Johnson, Lord Snooty, miles ahead of Ken Livingstone, according to those polls. April told a different story. And this is where we left it. Very, very close indeed. That's why this election for London Mayor is so exciting, because we just don't know which way it's going to go. And, of course, the frustration of tonight is we just won't make any progress.
And the sad thing, Jeremy, about all that is that they claim this is the most brilliantly efficient new way of counting electronically. And we don't get the result till late tomorrow afternoon or early evening or something.
It's great, isn't it? You bring in new technology and people use it as an excuse to go to bed.
I mean, it's a it's a disaster.
Yeah,
and I
well,
mean,
There's an idea.
and what's the point of voting if you don't know what the result is and we can't all enjoy it?
I know, there's
Absolutely
something, I mean,
pointless.
just listening to your discussion of this year, there's something wonderful about this late night moment we're all in, and the politicians talk with a bit more candour, and we see how they all get on with each other, and it's a really great little Petri dish for the politics, and not to have the London Mayor in the dish is frustrating.
Oh, well, I'm glad you've spotted the candour.
I was getting worried from it.
I'm going to join Peter Tatchell, who's waiting for us in Oxford. Actually, he's not. He's in London, by the looks. He's behind Tower Bridge behind him. Peter Tatchell, thanks for joining us. Now, you're a member of the Green Party and a candidate for Oxford East. Now, how have the Greens done? Our figures show the Greens are down from their position in these same elections in 2004 and slightly lower than you were last year. That it's a bit of a disappointment for the Greens tonight.
It's been mixed results, but overall we have made some slight gains. But the big story is Norwich. In Norwich, we've won 3 seats. We've overtaken the Liberal Democrats. We're now just 2 seats behind Labour. So the Greens are the official opposition in Norwich. And I'm very confident come the next election, we will overtake Labour and be the governing party in Norwich. The big fright for Labour is that in Norwich, particularly in Charles Clarke's Norwich South seat, the Greens outpolled Labour. And that would mean that if those results were replicated in the next general election, Charles Clarke would lose his seat and Adrian Ramsey, the Green candidate, would be elected. So that's a very, very encouraging sign.
Yeah, what is it about Norwich, then, that's got some message that the whole of the rest of the country has failed to pick up?
I think the local Green Party there has been very, very solid, very consistent, very active on the ground, very imaginative policies. It's pioneering so many local initiatives, not just on green issues, but on housing issues, transport. It's opened out the green agenda to be a social justice agenda, which I think has had a big appeal to a lot of former Labour voters who are very disillusioned with Labour and see the Greens as the party of social justice.
But just there, nowhere else. The message isn't getting through. And what's more, the people are starting to steal your thunder, aren't they? I mean, there's not a Tory who won't say vote blue, get green.
Well, that's what they say, but of course, you know, David Cameron famously pointed to Kirklees Council saying the Tories there had brought in all these policies. In fact, it was the Green councillors on Kirklees Council, who initiated all the new initiatives on green issues,
Okay, well,
which the Tories then took up.
Take your own neck of the woods, Oxford, hung council, Greens down one.
Yeah, that is a disappointment. The results there are fairly mixed. We are, doing well in some of the seats, but close second in some of them. There does seem to have been a bit of a Labour revival there. I think that's an area where we've got work to do, and where we will be doing more work to make sure that we restore that confidence and build on it. So I'm sure that Oxford, East and West, is strong Green territory, and we just have to make sure that we get the message out and sharpen our message to local voters about the initiatives we've brought in.
Do you think, just one last thing, you voted to have a leader, I can't remember how many years ago it was, a long time back, you still haven't got one. Do you think it would be better if you had a leader, perhaps you yourself, and could actually take the party somewhere, instead of having these sort of shambles of, speakers, principal speakers, whatever they're called? I don't mean to insult the Green Party, but it's the principal speakers, that's what they mean.
Yeah, we like to think we're a democratic, non-hierarchical party, more egalitarian than the others, but it's true we are going to have, from November, a Green leader and deputy leader, or two co-leaders. The party will vote on that in November, and I'm sure that we will elect someone. I'm not going to be standing, but I'm sure we'll elect someone who will be able to sharpen the Green message and show that we are a serious party, not just on Green issues, but on democracy, civil liberties, human rights and social justice.
Peter Tatchell, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Nick.
Well, some interesting analysis that's just come in from the boffins behind the scenes about where Labour's vote is falling most, and it's falling most in its heartland. So according to our keyword analysis, it's down by 5 points in Labour heartland seats, compared with 3 points across the key wards as a whole. Now, you may say, who cares? You may even think, oh, well, that's all right, we'll get those votes back if you're a member of the Labour Party. The difficulty is it'll fuel those in the Labour Party who say, look, we've abandoned our core vote, we've abandoned those that we should be helping. That will encourage those people in the Labour Party to make that argument about what change should be made. Others, like Charles Clarke, who we saw earlier, will be arguing for a completely different message, and that will pull the Prime Minister in two different directions.
Andy Burnham?
Well, I think Nick's right. You could read those figures two ways. You might say represent a heartland seat. I was out in Leigh today, and as I was indicating to you before, David, I was picking up real concerns about people's finances and the economy. Interestingly, those are the seats where the Tories, where they're not gaining as much ground, but they really do need to make gains. So next door to me, we have Bolton West, which is Ruth Kelly's seat, and that is a seat where the Tories absolutely need to make inroads, and Bolton steadfastly refused to go Tory tonight, and I think that is a very significant result. Bolton is one of those seats that people always look to. It hasn't gone, and I think we in the North West will take some encouragement from that.
Yes.
Let me go back to something we were talking about earlier on. I was very disappointed that you didn't say, Andy Burnham, that Labour should listen, because I decided I was going to collect £1 from every Labour politician who said that they were going to listen. You used an awful lot of other verbs, but not that one. But what you did say was that, of course, we have to respond in the right way. And one of the things that I haven't been picking up, and I don't think either David or Nick has been picking up, is what would the right response be? What is it that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet and your colleagues, what should they now be doing, as not just saying, but doing, that might make a difference between now and what we now think is going to be 2010, don't we?
That is the question. That's the phrase I use, because I feel that says it for me. I think we do need to reflect and then respond in the right way. And as I say, not be arrogant, take these results on the chin, and then come back with proposals that respond to what we think the different issues that have been at play in this election. But tonight, I can't. Tonight this is to be discussed by the Cabinet for us to come back with proposals. But I think you will see that. There are already ideas that colleagues are bringing forward, and I think you will see the fight back come on. I think we are going to move into a phase where there is very clearly a fight on, and the Tory party are going to be under a lot more scrutiny. I actually don't think, if you ask a member of the public on the street today, that they could probably name a Tory policy. I think what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years is rebranding going on. Mood, gesture, rebranding. Just let me say this, Eric. I think we've not actually. So people have seen the mood music, but they've not actually subjected the Tories to scrutiny. I think
All right,
they are.
okay,
they are going to do that now.
And if you're right, and it's just the mood music, just look at the effect that the mood music has had yesterday in the voting and how it would affect our House of Commons. Jeremy's got our favourite little scene to end the evening. Just have a look at this. Oh, well, that's not Jeremy.
Well, come down, if you can, through the sky and land on Whitehall and turn left and look for the House of Parliament here. And where is St Stephen's Gate? Hang on. Yep, got it. In we go. Through to Central Lobby. Go left to the Commons, of course, down through the Reporters' Lobby and in through the doors. And hello, you find me here in the House of Commons. And we'll have a look, shall we, at how the results, the projected national share would populate these seats. But first, let's have a look at who's in there at the moment, what the last general election did to put Labour MPs in. 351 won here in 2005. And this mark down here, just show you this bit of grey here, is the 324 mark, past which a party must go to have a majority. So 324 in the House of Commons in 2005, and Labour, of course, the largest single party. And on the opposition benches over here, the Conservatives with 192, and the Lib Dems then with 63, I think it is. Yes, 63. And then the other MPs next to them. And all of that adds up to a majority, a Labour majority there, 66 seats. So that's where we are. That's the existing House of Commons. These are the MPs in the chamber who were elected in 2005. Let's send them down to Annie's bar. Let's start again. Let's take our projected national share and find out where the parties stand if what happened in the local elections. We've already done an extrapolation into a vote across the country. Now we take that vote and put it into the House of Commons. You appreciate it's a slightly tenuous exercise, but for your enjoyment, here we go. Biggest party, have a guess. Here they come, those blue Conservative MPs, and way past. By the way, next House of Commons, it'll be 326 you need for a majority, and they're way past it with 394 MPs. By far the largest single party in the House of Commons, and very easy for them to govern without assistance. Who would be around to assist them should they want to talk to another party in the very, very unlikely event? Labour? What's happened to Labour? 169 seats for Labour. Much reduced, in fact, rather down to the sort of level Conservatives were at in 1997 after Tony Blair's Labour landslide. Lib Dems on 59, so level pegging pretty much for them, and then some others as well. And we could possibly have a look at the leaders, shall we? Where are they? These party leaders here. Mr. Brown over there, David Cameron here, sitting, standing, waiting to discuss what goes forward. Mr. Cameron not looking too happy in our graphic, but he ought to be. Conservative majority of 138. David.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Well, there we are. John McDonnell, you ran against the leadership, challenged. You had a try. We have another try now on the basis of this as a Labour, disaffected Labour MP.
Well, I couldn't get on the ballot paper last time, if you remember, because I couldn't get enough nominations. Well, the rules are now you need double the amount, so I doubt if I could get on the ballot paper this time. But
do you think there should be a challenge to the leadership?
Well, I think part of the problem that we've got now is because we didn't have a leadership election last year. We never had the debate around the policies that are causing us the problems at the moment.
What kind of debate would you have liked to have seen? What sort of issues would you like to change?
Well, the issue, people want to know if we're on their side, and the 10p issue has been coming up time and time again. So I would have liked to debate on taxation, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're portrayed as increasing the taxes for the poorest and yet not doing anything around non-domiciles or corporation tax or city bonuses, those sorts of issues.
Everybody's been talking about the need for Gordon Brown to listen, but do you think he's going to change tack now, or do you think it is going to carry on much as it has been?
Well, here's the problem. Gordon Brown became leader in an almost atmosphere of euphoria because he wasn't Tony Blair, but also because he promised change, and those changes haven't come about, and I think that's why there's an element of disillusionment. So, yeah, it is about listening, but it's not. Listening is no good unless you act. So there has to be a radical change of policies.
There's been major losses in Wales for 3 councils Labour's lost control of now. Here they are. Just have a look at them. Flintshire. Labour down 13 councillors in Flintshire. Conservatives up 5 and the Liberal Democrats up 1. Merthyr. Labour down 9. Liberal Democrats up 6. And there's a Blaenau Gwent as well, I think, which we don't have the figures for right now. Betson, it looks like a disaster for Labour in Wales tonight.
Well, yes, you were talking earlier about where Labour was truly losing out in its heartlands, well, that is certainly the picture here in Wales. Those unitary authorities, since becoming unitary authorities, have only been led by Labour, well, no more. The same can be said about Newport, the only city that Labour held, well, no more again. I asked earlier, was Rhodri Morgan's Labour going to feel the full force of an anti-Labour swing? Well, I think we now have the answer, and the answer is clearly yes.
Betson, thanks very much. We're coming to the end of this, but Andy Burnham, Tony King said after about an hour of this programme this was going to be a truly dreadful night for Labour, and that is what it is, isn't it? A truly dreadful night.
The disappointing results, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say these are not disappointing results for the party. Of course they are. They are mixed results in some ways. We can look to places where we've done quite well. So I mean, I think we're going to have to look at these results tomorrow, see what they mean, look where we've done okay. But overall, yeah, they're a disappointing set of results.
John McDonnell, looking as if you're half crazed when you say that.
Rank and file Labour Party activists and Labour MPs are saying the same thing as me. If we try and interpret it then that way, we sleepwalk towards a Tory government. Tony King's point of previous elections is you look at the trend. After general elections, at the next local government election, we usually dip, but we bounce back. On each occasion now, we bounce back less. This time, the bounce could be into a Tory government. That's what we all fear. So it is about listening, but it's about changing the policies.
Very brief, 30 seconds from each of you, then we must stop. Tony King.
I have to agree with what everybody is saying all evening. It's been a dreadful night for the Labour Party. There's no getting around that. And it's been a very good night for the Tories. There's no getting around that either.
Nick?
The Labour Party has no memory of an experience like this under Gordon Brown and Tony Blair. They have no guide as to what to do about it. And what's striking is there is no suggestion coming as to what should be done about it. Argument, yes, for some on the left, some on the right, some in the government that they should listen. No message as to quite what they should listen to.
And tomorrow, of course, they have the results from London and Ken Livingstone, and we know that Labour has to hold London if it's to win at a general election.
With the clear consensus building that Boris Johnson will be the next mayor.
So there we go. Here are the final figures. Projected share. Conservatives 44, Labour 24, Liberal Democrats 25, in second place, others on 7. That's the result of these local elections this year from all of us here. Remember Ken Livingstone's result tomorrow evening from all of us here. Good morning.
The latest headlines from BBC News. The US has carried out a missile attack in Somalia, killing the leader of an Islamic militant group linked to al-Qaeda. The Olympic torch is starting the latest leg of its global tour in Hong Kong, as you can see from our live pictures. The flame is carried in relay through the territory under tight security. New CCTV images of the July the 7th bombings in London have been shown for the first time during the latest court case connected with the attacks. And it's been a bad night for Britain's Labour government, with poor results in local elections in England and Wales. The ballot is being seen as a key test of popularity for Prime Minister Gordon Brown. You're watching World News Today. I'm Philippa Thomas. Let's take another look now at our live pictures from Hong Kong, where the Olympic torch is on the latest leg of its controversial global tour. At the harbour front, this is where it's taking place. Thousands of people have turned up to support the flame on its journey through China. You can see the flame there being carried. Many people wearing red to show their support for the Games and the nation. And also, as the Olympic torch goes through the streets of Hong Kong, it's controversial. Only today, this week, there's been another call for Jewish people throughout the world to boycott the Beijing Games. This comes from a group of influential Jewish leaders here in the United States. One of those is Dr. Raphael Medoff, director of the David S. Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies. I asked Dr. Medoff why he believes these Olympics should be snubbed.
The Chinese government wants to use the Olympics as a way to whitewash its image and to distract the world from its abuses, whether in Tibet or its support of the government in Sudan or the missiles it provides to Iran and Syria. And so it's important for Americans to stand up and protest and make it clear that China's behavior is unacceptable.
What would you achieve? How would a boycott help the human rights situation?
It would send a very powerful message to the leaders in Beijing that their behavior in Darfur and Tibet and elsewhere is something that the free world cannot accept any longer.
Many say, of course, that we shouldn't mix politics and sport, including the Secretary General of Israel's Olympic Committee, who said there are forums for these kind of protests, like the United Nations.
The problem is that Beijing is using the Olympics as a grand stage from which to pretty up its own image and make the world forget some of its very heinous policies in places like Darfur and elsewhere. So Americans really have no choice but to speak out because the Chinese are doing things which are simply morally unacceptable.
What do you say to the argument that engagement will be more productive than isolation, and a boycott means isolating China?
The Bush administration has been trying engagement and quiet diplomacy for quite some time, and they don't seem to be succeeding. There's been no significant reduction, for example, in China's support for the genocidal government in Sudan. We've seen no end to China's supply of advanced missiles to Syria and Iran, or its friendship for the Hamas terrorists. And now we see the Chinese going ahead with their mistreatment of the people of Tibet, despite the fact that they know that the free world sympathizes with the Tibetans.
Briefly, your call for a boycott has made headlines around the world. What kind of response have you had in terms of growing support?
A significant number of people now look back at the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany and realize that America made a serious mistake by carrying on with business as usual, participating in the Olympics, and not bluntly challenging the German government. Likewise today, a growing number of Americans are realizing that it would be wrong to simply treat the Chinese government as if it is a moral equal and to attend the Olympics and behave as if there's nothing wrong, when in fact there's something very wrong with China's totalitarian policies at home and its abuses abroad and its support for rogue and terrorist regimes.
Rafael Medoff speaking to me a little earlier. Now, Hollywood star Uma Thurman has come face-to-face with her alleged stalker in a New York courtroom. Jack Jordan, who denies stalking and harassment, had a fantasy that the star was predestined to be with him. She told the court Jordan made her feel panicked and frightened.
Arriving at court to face the man who's done everything in his power to get this close to her. Uma Thurman was giving evidence against Jack Jordan, a former psychiatric patient who's been accused of harassing her and her family for over 2 years. Inside court, the Kill Bill star seemed shaken. She had to walk past the man accused of stalking her, but at no time did she look at him. Uma was then asked to read out letters prosecutors claim were sent by Mr. Jordan. In one, the words, "My hands should be on your body at all times." Witnesses claim he also turned up on set while Uma was filming My Super Ex-Girlfriend in New York. The actress told the court she felt sick and completely freaked out by his attentions. But Jack Jordan denies harassing her. The 37-year-old's lawyers say he was in love with Uma and that he never wanted to do her any harm. If found guilty, he could face up to a year in jail, although Uma's family have said they'd rather he just got help. Anna Holligan, BBC News.
And police in Florida are investigating the apparent suicide of a woman they believe to be the so-called DC Madam, Deborah Jean Palfrey. They found her body in a shed near her mother's mobile home. Last month, Miss Palfrey was convicted of running a prostitution ring with a very high-end client list, including US lawmakers. Well, over to James in London now. James, you have election results rolling in as we speak.
Yes, we do. We're talking about the local elections taking place here in England and Wales. And it looks like bad news for the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. His governing Labour Party looks to have put in its worst performance for 40 years in local elections. Across England and Wales, the opposition Conservative Party are celebrating what appears to be a very strong showing. Well, our political correspondent David Thompson is in our central London studio for us. David, most of the votes are in. The governing Labour Party's politicians must be worried, to say the least.
I think that's right. I mean, you know, if you think about it, the last time the Labour Party turned in a set of local election results as bad as this, the Beatles were in the charts and Flower Power was all the rage. Let me give you some numbers around this. In 2004, when this set of seats were up for grabs before, they got 26% of the share of the vote, and that was seen in the background of Iraq, disillusionment with Tony Blair, and people thought, well, it can't get much worse than this. Well, it has this time round. They've now got 24% of the vote, compared to the Conservatives, who are up 4% on 44%, and the Lib Dems, who are roughly where they were last time, at about 25%. And yes, it's seen as very bad. These are sort of a set of election results which Gordon Brown hoped would go well for him, or at least not as badly as some people had predicted. Well, at the moment, it looks as if they have gone pretty much as badly as they could have done.
Was there a feeling before these elections that Labour wouldn't do so well?
I think that's right. There was a feeling that they wouldn't do particularly well, but the game really was working out how badly they would do. If they'd done, you know, if they'd maybe lost sort of, say, 50 to 80 seats, something like that, funnily enough, it would be seen as quite a positive result, because governments do tend to take a bit of a caning from the electorate in mid-term, which is where we are in the UK at the moment. It looks as if, and as I say, not all the results are in yet, but it looks as if the government's not going to do as well as they'd hoped at all. So yes, a pretty bad set of results. And it's a headache for Gordon Brown, who will now have to try and sort of relaunch his government and try and regain the initiative from the Conservatives.
And I suppose this is the crunch point, isn't it? Does it look like, with the results in so far, that they could signal that the opposition Conservative Party might win in a next general election here in the United Kingdom?
Well, I mean, you always have to be cautious about these figures, but if this result was replicated in a general election, the opposition Conservative Party would become the government with a majority of more than 100. So there'd be a huge landslide away from Labour and towards the Conservatives. So yes, very worrying at times for Gordon Brown indeed.
Oh, it does sound like Gordon Brown is facing a crisis.
Well, I think you might say crisis, what crisis, to borrow a phrase from a former Labour leader. But I think crisis is probably putting it a little high. You have to remember that we're 2 years away from when Gordon Brown has to call a general election, and a lot can happen in that time. So I think these are difficult times at the moment. I think it's going to be a very difficult summer for Gordon Brown, but we are some way away from a general election yet, so there's still all to play for.
David Thompson at Westminster in central London, thanks very much indeed.
You're watching World News Today. Still to come, net concern. A BBC investigation has revealed serious security flaws on the internet networking site Facebook. But coming up shortly, we have World Business Report from Singapore with Rico Hizon. Rico, hello. What's coming up in the programme?
Well, still more bad news, Philippa, from the world's largest economy, the US. You have manufacturing falling for a third time in a row in April. And is Asian art a safe haven for investors? We bring you a special report on the new art fund. These and other stories coming up shortly on the World Business Report.
Israel has marked its annual Holocaust Remembrance Day with the traditional 2-minute silence to remember the 6 million Jews killed by the Nazis. Among those marking the day were 12 people saved by Oskar Schindler, whose rescue of 1,200 Jews was immortalised in the film Schindler's Lists. One of the so-called Schindler's Jews spoke to the BBC's Paul Wood.
Israel paused today to remember the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. 250,000 survivors are living in Israel today. Among them are a few of those who owe their lives to the remarkable German businessman Oskar Schindler. He used bribery and cunning to keep 1,200 Jews out of the death camps.
He was a very handsome, charming man, and he used his charm especially on women all the time. When you looked at him, his face told him that you can rely on him. Everybody who was young enough and strong enough had to wear. This was the way how we thought at that time that we can survive. They bribed everybody there in Berlin, and he got this permission. Now he told them he needs for this special special men and women who will do the work he needs there. And for this he needs 800 men and 300 people. And this is the way how Schindler's List was created or was born. When we saw Schindler walking around, we felt safe. And that was the whole, it was everything for us. This is the main reason how I am alive, I can speak now today.
The national focus of Holocaust Day is the memorial and museum at Yad Vashem. This place is part of the effort to document what happened so it can never be denied. And most Israelis believe a strong army and state is what ensures it can never be repeated. Paul Wood, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Now it's time for business news with Rico.
The world's largest economy continues to slow down. Manufacturing contracts for the third month in a row in April. And is Asian art a safe haven for investors? We bring you a special report on a new art fund. Glad you could join us for this edition of the World Business Report. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. We start off with more bad news from the world's largest economy. U.S. manufacturing contracted for the third month in a row in April. The Institute for Supply Management's Factory Activity Index was at 48.6. A below 50 reading shows output is falling. And as a result, everywhere you look, there's another sign that U.S. consumers are spending less. Now, one of the biggest retail chains has admitted that, for the first time, it has to close some of its shops simply because they're not selling enough. Home Depot, the do-it-yourself giant, is going to shut down 15 of its stores. While that small proportion of the total, it's not a good sign for the company or the U.S. economy. Caroline Hepker has more.
With the worst housing slump in almost 17 years here in America and a general economic slowdown, the demand for Home Beautiful has shriveled. It means that companies like Home Depot, which has almost 2,000 stores across the US, is making big cuts. Based in Atlanta, Home Depot says it's axing plans for 50 new stores, and 15 underperforming outlets will be closed with the loss of 1,300 jobs. Home Depot will still cut the ribbon on 55 new sites worldwide this year, but that's well below the 200 new locations it's been used to opening. The pullback will cost Home Depot almost $600 million. The idea, though, is to boost profitability and free up cash in a tough US market.
We've seen a pullback across the retail landscape from growing square footage. In this environment, it just doesn't make as much sense to allocate capital to new store growth when it's really unclear how long the weakness is going to persist. There's a number of indications that we could be in for a tough environment for an extended period.
Other retailers are also cutting back, from Walmart to JCPenney. The International Council of Shopping Centres estimates there'll be 25% more store closings this year than in 2007. Expensive food and gas has eaten into consumers' disposable income, whilst most Americans felt more gloomy last month than at any time in the last 5 years. It leaves retailers like Home Depot shifting into a new mindset. The company expects sales to fall this year by some 5%. With no rebound in the housing sector on the horizon, it's time to batten down the hatches and survive with what you've got. Caroline Hepker, BBC News in New York.
And investors are now awaiting a key jobs report from the U.S. later today. Yet another of those signs of a slump in consumer spending, this one from the car industry. Auto sales figures show that the big three U.S. car makers are all selling many less vehicles than they were last year. In April, General Motors and Chrysler both saw a 23% decline in sales compared with April of last year. Ford sales dropped by 19%. Oil prices, meanwhile, are falling on expectations that oil giant Exxon will restart production following the resolution of a strike in Nigeria. The 8-day strike contributed to near record high oil prices after the company was forced to almost completely shut down production. Asian art is booming, especially in China and India, where new auction records are being broken. But if you can't afford Chinese art, where to look for the next boom? This week saw the launch of a fund which aims to invest in Asian art. Sharanjit Lail finds out if it makes good sense to invest in artworks at a time of financial market volatility.
Parvati Nair is an Indian artist who's been based in Singapore for over a decade. She works with many different mediums: oil, watercolor, ink, and in this case, a mechanical pencil. Like many artists, she welcomes buyers of her work, but draws the line at investors looking to make her art into a commodity.
Ideally, for the art world, you don't really need investors, you need collectors, you need people who are there for the long term, who are interested in the entire body of an artist's work rather than short-term gains. It's like you need value investors rather than short-term punters.
Former art auctioneer Andrew Littlejohn says he knows the art market and he's canvassing for money. A minimum of $250,000 is what you'll need to buy into his art fund. He aims to raise $100 million by the end of the year and plans to use the proceeds to buy artworks from Asia and elsewhere.
There is definitely an emotional element to investing in art, and that's what helps drive prices up over time. Now, this is not something that's necessarily going to be attractive to someone who solely wants to collect, because there is an emotional element to owning art. That being said, when you strip away the emotional element, you can take an objective view and look at things from a strictly investment perspective, and that's where true value is able to be identified, and that's where we can help encourage along these artists that are part of our fund and increase the value over time.
In the heart of Singapore's financial centre, investors punt on everything from currencies to crude oil to complex derivatives. But some may find oil on canvas a hard sell.
In many parts of Asia, the market in modern art is extremely unevolved, and therefore it's very hard to put a price on things. And the danger